Human Rights Watch has released a new report calling the situation in Sudan's West Darfur State one of ethnic cleansing and says crimes against humanity are being committed, including torture, rape and looting. It's found that attacks by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces and its allied armed groups in el-Geneina, the capital of West Darfur State, have killed thousands of people and displaced hundreds of thousands as refugees. It says tribal groups are being targeted with the apparent objective of at least having them permanently leave the region. In response, the NGOs calling on the United Nations and the African Union to, quote, urgently impose an arms embargo on Sudan, sanction those responsible for serious crimes, and deploy a mission to protect civilians. Alan Boswell is Horn of Africa Director at the International Crisis Group, and he's joining us live now from Doha. Good to have you with us. Alan, I want to bring you to that last point, the call for the UN and the African Union to urgently impose an arms embargo on Sudan and the other agreements. How confident could you be that that would actually happen?
Well, Darfur is actually already under arms embargo, so pretty much everything under this report would already fall under existing United Nations arms embargoes, but those were imposed a long time ago. As your audience will know, the UN Security Council is much more divided now, and the chances of them expanding the arms embargo to all of Sudan is not going to happen. But also, we've seen basically no enforcement of the existing embargo on Darfur already.
In terms of the enforcement, how do you actually carry that out, given the fact that it's very difficult for at least some organizations to get some sort of presence in Sudan to be able to monitor the situation?
Yeah, I mean, the Sudanese have basically been forgotten, I think. Obviously, there's the war in Gaza going on now, which has taken up a lot of attention. But most of the crimes documented in this Human Rights Watch report, which, by the way, is a very impressive investigation report, most of those crimes took place, before the war in Gaza began. Frankly, it would take very high-level political focus on trying to pressure those who are arming the various sides and have and the actual belligerents themselves to stop this. Obviously, many of the United Nations tools are not very functional. So it would just take, I think, very high-level focus from world leaders, and that's never been there.
We mentioned that the report says that tribal groups are being targeted with the objective of at least trying to have them permanently leave the region. What is, in your assessment, the motivation for that?
Well, I will say this is a very complex crisis. Part of it goes back 20 years ago to the original war in Darfur, which never ended, but did earn the former president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, an indictment for genocide at the International Criminal Court. This is very similar types of violence occurring now. But the crimes took place basically in the days and weeks after Sudan fell into this big civil war in Khartoum, and then it basically spread out here. So you have a very complicated mix of intercommunal tensions between Arab-identifying groups on the one hand and non-Arab groups on the other. The war spread locally, and then you had clashes break out between the Sudanese army and this Rapid Support Forces paramilitary, which were already fighting in the capital Khartoum. And then it became an intercommunal conflict, and you had mass crimes, mass atrocities committed. And essentially the RSF and the allied Arab militias ethnically cleansed, as Human Rights Watch says, the Masalite population, most of whom were pushed into neighboring Chad and are now refugees and expelled from their land. And as Human Rights Watch documents, at least thousands were killed during that.
If the recommendations made by Human Rights Watch aren't followed, how bad could this get, in your estimate?
Well, the violence in West Darfur has died down a bit, mostly because the Masalite population has already been pushed out. The big concern now is that in a different part of Darfur, in North Darfur, around the capital of North Darfur, Al-Fashir, you have the Rapid Support Forces who have recently encircled that city. There's been an uneasy standoff for months, but the tensions have been escalating. You have the Sudanese, it's the last stronghold of the Sudanese army in Darfur, but you have a number of other armed groups from these, from mostly the Zagawa, another non-Arab community. The concern is if that leads to all-out fighting again there, that we would see similar levels of violence. And already on the outskirts, we've seen several villages being razed. It's there are already probably atrocities being committed, but it could get much worse.
Alan Boswell for International Crisis Group, thank you very much indeed.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.